Procedural modeling can be kind of difficult to get started with and very confusing. It's a lot different than traditional modeling techniques, and it's kind of a newer technique as well, so there's not a ton out there on how to do everything like there is for procedural modeling techniques. So in this video, I kind of want to go over some of the mindset and ideas that go into creating procedural models and kind of the basics of how to go about getting started with this. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to create this capsule. So if you look in Houdini, if you go into the primitives, they have the box, sphere, torus, tube, they have all that, but they don't have a capsule like something like Cinema 4D would have. So we're going to go and create this on our own. And as you can see with all these settings that we have, we can dynamically change this and it will update based on whatever settings that we have selected. So how do we go about actually generating something like this? So the first thing we want to do is drop in our geometry node, and then we're going to focus on the main shape first, which is going to be just a tube. So let's go ahead and disable that. And we're going to drop in a tube here, and then we're going to make this tube a polygon. So this is exactly what we want. So we want to make the tube go either up or down from the origin. So I'm going to choose down just because it's what I was using in the past. And the reason we want to do this is because if I drop in a sphere here, which we're also going to be using, and I set the display flag here and set this to a polygon mesh, you can see, actually let's just view it. Right at the origin, there is this center line, which is the center of the sphere. And we're going to use that center of the sphere to combine it with the tube here, and we're going to set the top of the tube to be right at the origin as well. So how do we go about doing that? So the way I'm going to do that is we're going to select the height, we're going to right click, copy parameter, and then we're going to set the center to the center Y, and we're going to paste relative references. So if you just do that, it's going to go up from the origin based on whatever your height is, which is not exactly what we want. We want it to be half of that because half of our height is going to be half of our tube. So it's going to set it right on the origin, and then no matter what we do to this height value, it's going to go up from there. And we want it to be negative because that's what we're going to use for this video. And it does the exact same thing, which is exactly what we want. So the next thing that we want to do is we want to make the columns of the sphere line up with the columns of the tube. Why don't I actually reverse the display flags here? So as I up the columns here on the sphere, you can see that it's not the same as our tube, which is not what we want. So let's go ahead and select the columns from our tube, copy that parameter, and we're going to paste that into the columns of our sphere. You can see once we do that, as we change this, it's going to update the columns on our sphere, which is what we need. And the next thing that we need to do is we need to also do this for the uniform scale. So if we copy our uniform scale from our tube, we can just go ahead and paste that into our sphere. And I hit enter, and then we go back, and as we change our radius scale here, you can see that it's updating our tube and our sphere, which is what we need. So from here, we want to just create only the top of this sphere. We don't want the bottom, because trying to combine that with the tube is just going to create a nightmare. So let's use a Boolean, and we're going to also create a cube, and we're going to wire these up. So right away, this isn't going to do anything because I look at our sphere. Actually, if I look at our box with the display flag of the sphere, you can see that our sphere is a lot bigger than our cube. So we want to actually make the cube to be bigger than our sphere. Right now, the sphere is twice the size of our cube, and we want our cube to be in line with that. So how do we go about doing that? We're going to copy the uniform scale of our sphere. We're going to paste this into our size, and then we're going to multiply this by 2. We're going to do that for the x and the z. So we'll multiply this by 2 as well. So now it's completely encasing both the x and the z directions, but not the y. And why not the y? Because we want to use the sphere, we want to use this radius as well. So if we adjust this, if we were to just copy and paste this value into this thing, it would not work as we adjust our radius scale for here. So we need to account for both of those. So we're going to paste our relative reference for our uniform scale. Then we're going to go back to our sphere here, set this back to 1, and we're going to copy this value as well. And then we're going to go back to our cube, and then we're going to go to the end of this, and then we're going to multiply these two together. And we can paste relative references. And now we can copy this parameter here and paste this value into our center. And we want to multiply this by 0.5 and also make it negative because we only want the bottom of our sphere. So now if I reverse these flags, you can see that it's completely encasing the sphere. And if I go actually to the Boolean, you can see that it's getting rid of everything we want. So just to illustrate here, we can actually go back to the sphere here, and as we change this value, it's going to update, which is what we need. But also if we go back to our tube here, and actually let's set this to something other than 1. Set it to 2.2. Now if I set this to something like 2 as well, you can see it's still encasing our entire sphere, which is exactly what we need. So we're all set there, but we have a slight problem with our Boolean. If we look at our Boolean, we have this face right here, which we don't want this face because, again, it's just going to create a nightmare for when we go to combine the tube and the sphere here in a minute. So how do we get rid of that? We want to go into our Boolean settings and we want to set A as a surface. And that's just going to get rid of the face there because it thinks that the sphere doesn't have any, basically it thinks the sphere doesn't have any volume inside of it. It's just quite literally polygons with nothing inside, which is what we need. So from here, we can go ahead and merge these. So let's wire these up. And you can see that now we have exactly what we want. But if we actually were to change any of these, it's going to mess up our what we have built here because they're not connected. So the way that we get around this is we're going to use a fuse and we'll wire these up. And for later, I'm just going to set this to something like 0.05 because it's going to need a larger value to make sure that the objects are fusing together properly, and I'll explain that a little bit further here in a minute. So we have exactly what we need here. We can go in and change the height, the rows, the columns. We can do all that, which is what we need, but we still need to get the bottom of our tube here. So we're going to copy all of our settings and our nodes for our sphere, and we're going to place that into our merge. Now it's just going to create another copy, which is not what we need. We need to actually inverse some of this. So we're going to set the display flag for the Boolean, and we want to go into the second box, and we're going to get rid of this negative because we only want the bottom of the sphere now so that we can attach it to the bottom of our tube. But how do we get that onto the bottom of our tube? We're going to create a transform, and we'll go ahead and wire this up. And to cut wires, you can hold Y and click and drag, and it'll cut them. So now in our transform, we want to actually go to our tube, and we want to select the height. We're going to copy that parameter. We're going to do the same thing that we did for the boxes. and the tube. So we're going to go to our translate, we're going to paste relative references, and then we're going to multiply that by 0.5. And then once again, we're going to just make that negative. So now if we look at our tube, and actually it's not 0.5, my mistake there. We want the whole value because we want it on the very bottom of our tube. So now if we look, we have our entire thing. And if we go to our fuse, if we were to set another transform, wire this up, we can now move this, and it's going to move our entire object. So this is exactly what we need, but we still have one slight issue here, which is our tube, or our capsule here we've created, is still below the origin. We want the center to be at the origin. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to, again, go back to our height of our tube, and we're going to go to translate. We're going to paste relative references, and we're going to multiply this by 0.5. And now it's set back into the middle of the origin of our scene, because up here, if you remember right, we moved it down by half of our height. So we're just reversing that setting down here. Now you could, if you don't want to go through that, you could also just move your spheres to, instead of keeping them at the origin, you can move them up and down. I just chose to do it this way. Now we have all of our settings here. We can change everything. It's going to update everything dynamically. And the reason why we have this fuse here is if I go to our sphere, and actually, we want to do one more thing with our spheres. We want to set this rows, so we're going to copy the first one, and we're going to paste this into the second sphere, paste relative references, so that both of them update accordingly with the first sphere's row settings. So perfectly fine, what we need. And the reason that I have this fuse set to 0.05 as our default value, I set that back to 0.1, and I start lowering some of these values. You can see that it's creating some issues, and you're not going to get fully away from this, but like with 8 rows here, this shouldn't be happening. So if we go to our fuse and we set this back to 0.05, it's just a value that I found that works for pretty much everything except for the setting of 4, because for whatever reason that one is a lot larger of a value. So, and I'm sure you're probably wondering, okay, well, I'm setting this rows to 21 rows. Why I don't see 21 rows along this sphere? That's because this sphere, it's 21 rows across this sphere. So you're setting, essentially, when you change that value, you're setting 21 rows for the top here and the bottom combined. So it'd be, if I set this to 22, there'd be 11 rows on the top, 11 rows on the bottom, and it's kind of working that way. And it is also going to fuse. If you set this value to too high of a value, it is going to start fusing stuff too much, which is not what you want either. You want to keep the nice clean geometry, which, like I said, 0.05 is kind of a value that I found that works pretty well. So last little bit here is we need to set up our parameter interface so that we can have all of these settings on our capsule generator right here. So we're going to go to edit parameter interface, and we're going to go ahead and select all of these and set them as invisible, and then we'll just drag one folder over and we'll call this settings. And then we can dive on into here. And most of our settings are going to be in this tube. So we can set our radius scale, our height, this wants to work, rows, our columns. Don't ask me why this does this and won't let you drag it into the folders. I don't know. And then we want to grab the rows for our sphere. I'm going to actually make a separator here, drag that in the settings, just to separate the values here a little bit. So the one thing that is going to be a little bit weird, it's going to be different from all the rest of these. We have to do something different with this value right here, because if we just drag the radius on over, you can see that it's going to have, if I click apply, go back to our thing, it's going to have 3 values, and we don't want to affect these X and Z values. So we're going to go ahead and delete that. And then we want to drag a float over because it's a float value. And we'll name this like end cap rows. And we'll just set the names to be the same. And that should be good. We click apply. And from there, we want to go back to our geometry level. We want to copy this parameter. And then we want to go to, sorry, I set this to end cap rows. I meant end cap scale. Let me paste this relative reference first. And then I can copy and paste this in as well. And the reason that that has disappeared is because if I go back to that, whoops. If I go back to our object level, if I look at our end cap scale and I go to our default, it's set to 0. We want to default that to 1, and you can see that it's come back. It's actually dive back in, and you notice as we change that value, it didn't change the bottom, and that's because we want to, whoops, clicking all the wrong buttons here. We want to set this for our second sphere as well. So we'll go back out, copy parameter, dive back in, and then paste relative reference. And then the last thing that you'd probably want would be this snap distance. And then you can name all of these according to however you want. I'm just going to leave that for now because I already have one set up. But now as we adjust any of these settings, it's going to work dynamically with what we have set up inside. And the last one here, the end cap scale, you can see that it's affecting both of these now. The only thing you want to make sure of is not to set that to 0. So you could actually set the, well, I guess that would just get rid of the end caps, and then you just have a tube if that's what you want. This can kind of be like an all-in-one thing, because if I drag the height all the way down, you'll see that it actually turns into a sphere, kind of. There we go. Now it's turned into a sphere, which is kind of cool. And if you look at the point numbers, you can see that it's merged around the center, and there's no duplicate values in there. So it's exactly what you would want if you wanted a sphere. But that's basically kind of a rundown of how to create things dynamically to procedurally model things. So this is kind of the basics that you're going to use when you're generating any sort of generator, I guess. You're going to basically think about, what do I need to accomplish and how can I make it so that it dynamically updates based on our values that we set. And I don't have to go in and change any sort of settings to make it work. It is all going to work no matter what settings. So you could set a global seed to this capsule generator, and it would randomize all of your different settings, and it would all just work. So that's what you want to think about, is how can I make it so I could set a random seed and it would generate a different set of geometry, and it would all just work. I wouldn't have to go in and make anything work on its own. So it's kind of like when you're creating HDAs for like Houdini engine to be used inside of game engines or Cinema 4D or anything like that. You need to kind of think forward about, what is this going to be used for and how can I make it work without having to change anything, or so that I have the options to change whatever I want in the future. So hopefully this helped you out and is a good introduction to kind of how you're going to go about creating things procedurally. I do have some plans for showing some different ways to create other procedural generators, so keep an eye out for those videos. And if you want to learn about how to create HDAs for use in other programs like Cinema 4D, for example, then go ahead and check out some of the other videos on my channel. But otherwise, thank you guys for watching and have a good day.